Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a security guard. My company contracts out to different businesses around the city, so I could be at an office building one week and a shopping center the next. The uniform they gave me is pretty standard. Black pants, black shirt, and a jacket with a company logo on it. Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. The reason I mention all this is because what happened this morning on my way home from work was so bizarre that I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I work the overnight shift, which means I'm catching the morning train home when everyone else is heading to work. It's usually packed, but I don't mind. I just put on my noise-canceling headphones, find a spot to stand, and zone out until my stop comes up. This morning started like any other. I got on the train at my usual time, found a spot near the middle of the car, and pulled out my headphones. The train was pretty full, and yeah, there were a few people sleeping in some of the seats. Happens all the time, not really my problem or anyone else's. I had my music going, just relaxing after a long shift, when suddenly someone ripped my headphones right off my head. I spun around, completely startled, and found myself face to face with this woman who looked furious. She immediately started yelling at me about how I shouldn't be wearing headphones at work. Then she went off about the people sleeping in the seats, calling them bums and demanding that I do something about it. She said the train was standing room only and she needed somewhere to sit. I was so confused. I looked down at my uniform, then back at her, trying to figure out what she was talking about. I told her no and asked for my headphones back. She was clutching them in her hand like they were evidence of some crime I'd committed. She asked me what I meant by no and insisted that since I was security, it was my job to handle it. She even told me to go arrest them or something. That's when it clicked. She thought I was transit security. Now I can kind of see where the confusion might come from. At first, I'm wearing a uniform, but anyone who looked would see the difference immediately. Transit security in my city wears either green or blue uniforms, with the words written right across the chest in huge letters. My uniform is black with my company's logo. Completely different. I explained to her that I wasn't transit security and told her to give me back my headphones before I called the cops. She insisted that I was and threatened to call the transit security office to get me fired if I didn't do something. Then she demanded my name and badge number. I almost laughed at that. My company doesn't even give out numbered badges. We have ID cards, sure, but they're generic. The number on them is just for the company's internal system, nothing that identifies me personally. I told her this. She changed tactics and told me to show her my identification instead. She said she wanted my name so she could report me. This woman was not backing down. She was red in the face, still holding my headphones hostage and drawing attention from everyone around us. People were starting to stare. I told her to call whoever she wanted, but I wasn't going to give my address to some crazy lady. That really set her off. She whipped out her phone and started dialing, making a big show of it. I could hear her when someone answered, though she turned slightly away from me. She reported one of their security officers to whoever was on the line. She complained that I was refusing to do my job and wouldn't give her my badge number or identification. She mentioned we were on the westbound train and would be arriving at the next station in a few minutes. I just stood there waiting. Part of me was annoyed, but another part was kind of curious to see how this was going to play out. She clearly wasn't going to give me my headphones back willingly, and I wanted them back. They weren't cheap. When we pulled into the next station, two actual transit security officers got on the train. They were wearing the proper green uniforms with the words clearly visible. They looked at me, then at her, probably trying to figure out what was going on. The first officer asked her if she was the one who called about a problem with one of their officers. She confirmed it was her and launched into her complaint again. She said I refused to remove homeless people from the seats and wouldn't give her my badge number or name. The officers looked at me again, this time really taking in my uniform. The second officer asked me if I worked for transit security. I explained that I didn't. I told them I was a private security guard who worked for a different company. I said I was just trying to ride home after my shift when she grabbed my headphones off my head and started demanding I do something about people sleeping on the train. The first officer asked her if he could see the headphones she was holding. She looked down at my headphones like she'd forgotten she was holding them, then tried to hand them to the officer instead of me. She protested that she didn't know I wasn't transit security and pointed out that I was wearing a uniform. The second officer pointed out that their uniforms were green and clearly marked. He said this was theft and they needed to call transit police. Her face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. She started backtracking immediately, asking what they meant and insisting she was just trying to get me to do my job. I spoke up and mentioned that those headphones cost $200. I also pointed out that she'd assaulted me by ripping them off my head. The transit police showed up about 10 minutes later. I gave my statement, showed them the receipt I still had on my phone for the headphones, and pressed charges. The woman kept trying to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, but the transit police weren't buying it. I got my headphones back. They checked them over to make sure they still worked, which thankfully they did. The woman was escorted off the train at that station. I heard one of the officers mention something about theft charges and possible assault. I've had the same schedule at the distribution center for about 5 years now. 4 days on, 3 days off. Those 3 days feel like gold during summer when you can be outside instead of stuck in a warehouse moving boxes around all day. This Wednesday was my first day off that week, and I woke up around 10 feeling pretty good. The apartment was quiet since my roommate works normal hours, so I had the place to myself. I spent the morning catching up on some shows I'd been meaning to watch, but by noon, my stomach was growling something fierce. The problem with having a day off is that I never plan ahead. My fridge was empty except for some condiments and a half-empty carton of milk that was probably past its prime. I could have driven to the grocery store, but I was craving something specific. A good sandwich. Not the grocery store kind you grab from a cooler, but a real made-to-order sandwich from that cafe about 10 minutes from my place. The drive over was nice with the windows down. It was one of those perfect summer days where it's hot, but not unbearable. When I pulled into the parking lot, I could see through the windows that the place was packed. That's the problem with the lunch rush. Everyone has the same idea at the same time. I walked in and joined the line. There were about 6 people ahead of me, and I could immediately see why things were moving slow. Behind the counter was this teenage girl, probably 16 or 17, who looked like she was drowning. She was the only one making sandwiches while the manager bounced between the register and helping her with toppings when things got backed up. I felt bad for them. You could tell they were understaffed, and anyone who's ever worked retail or food service knows that feeling. I wasn't in any rush though. It was my day off and I was just happy to be out of my apartment. The 3 women directly in front of me were clearly regulars based on how they were talking to each other. They looked to be in their 60s or 70s, all dressed nice like they'd just come from church or a luncheon or something. But there was something about the way they were talking, this sharp edge to their voices when they'd comment on other customers or the service. I've learned to recognize that tone. It usually means trouble. When it was their turn to order, things went downhill fast. The first woman started rattling off her order like she was reciting a novel. She wanted turkey, but not too much turkey, Swiss cheese, but could they make sure it was the good Swiss, toasted but only lightly toasted, and on and on. The poor girl behind the counter was trying her best to keep up, but you could see the stress building on her face. The second woman was even worse. She kept changing her mind mid-sandwich. First she wanted one type of bread, then she changed it. Then she wanted the meat switched out. Then she wanted extra vegetables, but not too much. The girl making the sandwich had to restart twice because the woman kept changing her specifications. The third woman seemed to take pleasure in being difficult. She criticized everything being made. She complained that there was too much mayo. She said the lettuce didn't look fresh. She asked if they could use the tomatoes from the back instead. The manager eventually came over to help, but even with 2 people working on these sandwiches, nothing was good enough. They complained about the temperature. They complained about how the ingredients were arranged. They complained about how long it was taking, even though they were the ones making it take forever. 15 minutes. It took 15 whole minutes to make 3 sandwiches because of their constant demands and changes. Meanwhile, the line behind me had grown even longer, and I could feel the frustration building from everyone waiting. When my turn came, the girl looked exhausted. I ordered the meatball sub plain and simple. Just bread meatballs, sauce, and a little ranch dressing. Nothing complicated. She had it done in about 2 minutes and passed it down the line toward the register. I grabbed my drink from the cooler and some chips, then got in line behind the 3 women who were now at the register. The manager rang up their order, and when she told them the total was around $30, they absolutely lost it. The first woman shrieked that they had waited forever to be served. The second one chimed in that the staff couldn't even make a sandwich. The third woman declared the whole situation unacceptable and demanded everything for free. They went back and forth with the manager for several minutes, their voices getting louder and more demanding. The poor woman behind the register was trying to stay professional, but you could see she was at the end of her rope. I'd had enough. I stepped forward and said I would take the sandwiches and add them to my order. The 3 women turned and looked at me with these huge grins on their faces. They thought they'd won. They thought some sucker was going to pay for their food while they got it for free. The manager looked relieved and rang everything up. 4 sandwiches, my drink, and chips. I handed over my card, got my receipt, and picked up all 4 sandwiches. The 3 women had already moved to sit at a table in the corner, thinking they'd get their food delivered to them. I grabbed my drink, balanced everything in my arms, and headed straight for the door. The first woman called out to me, asking if I still had their food and whether I was going to bring it to them. I stopped and turned around, holding up my receipt. I said no, that I had paid my money for my food and was taking it with me. I continued toward the door when all 3 of them scrambled to their feet. The second woman yelled that I needed to give them their food right now. The third one threatened to call the cops and have me arrested for theft. I told them to be my guest, and that I promised the police wouldn't be doing anything about this. I walked outside and stood by my car. Part of me probably should have just driven off, but honestly, I had nothing better to do that day. This was the most entertainment I'd had all week. One of them pulled out her phone and made the call while the other 2 circled around me like vultures. They said I was a thief. They said I was going to jail. They said they knew important people in this town who would make sure I paid for this. I just stood there not saying a word, holding my receipt and my sandwiches. By this point, half the cafe had come outside to watch the show. 2 police units pulled into the parking lot about 10 minutes later. The officers got out looking confused. The first officer asked if I was the guy they had called about, saying I matched the description they were given. I confirmed that it was me. He then asked if I had stolen their sandwiches and demanded money from them. I said not exactly, and suggested he should talk to the staff inside and take a look at my receipt. One officer went inside while the others stayed out with us. The 3 women were still going on, telling him their version of events where I was some kind of criminal who'd robbed them. The officer just nodded and took notes, but I could tell he was skeptical. When the first officer came back out, his expression said everything. He'd watched the security footage and talked to the manager. He explained that, according to the store, I had paid for the sandwiches fair and square. He also mentioned that the store wanted these 3 ladies trespassed for causing a disturbance. Their mouths dropped open. Their eyes went wide. They tried to argue, but the officers weren't having it. I was free to go, but instead, I decided to walk back inside and eat my lunch at the cafe. I figured the staff deserved to see the end of this story after everything they'd dealt with. When I sat down with my food, the manager came over with a chocolate chip cookie on a small plate. She said it was on the house and thanked me for what I had done out there. I said it was no problem and that they had been dealing with way too much that day. I watched through the window when the 3 women were escorted to their car by the police. They left looking even more angry than when this whole thing started, but at least they were gone. The meatball sub was pretty good too. I ended up giving the 3 other sandwiches to some of the staff on their break. They'd earned it. 5 years back, my husband and I were scraping by in college with a baby on the way. We both worked whatever jobs we could find while finishing our degrees. barely managing to cover the rent on our run-down duplex. $600 a month doesn't sound like much, but when you're living on ramen and determination, it might as well have been a fortune. The place was managed by this sketchy married couple who lived down the street. They ran a whole neighborhood of duplexes for some big property company. When we found out we were expecting, we got hit with that new parent excitement and decided to fix up the nursery. Our lease said we needed permission to paint, so I called up the husband who handled most of the property management stuff. He told me to go ahead and paint whatever we wanted, saying it was no problem at all. I asked if he was sure because I didn't want any issues when we moved out. He insisted we could trust him, and that they were cool like that. I should have gotten that in writing, but he seemed so laid back about it that we just went ahead and painted the nursery. Fast forward a while, and my husband got accepted to a program closer to another campus. We gave our notice to vacate like we were supposed to, and the property manager seemed totally understanding about it. When moving day approached, I started worrying about that nursery. I called him up and asked what color we needed to repaint it before we left. He told me not to even worry about it, explaining that since we'd been there long enough, they were repainting the whole place anyway. He said to just leave it and save myself the trouble. I asked if he was absolutely sure, and he said he was completely sure. That should have been my second red flag, but I was too stressed with packing and finals to think straight. We spent days cleaning that duplex until it practically sparkled. The only real damage was a tiny strip of carpet that had torn along a seam in one of the doorways. Everything else looked better than when we moved in. The property manager came through for the inspection and walked around nodding. He said everything looked great and that we'd get our whole deposit back, minus maybe a few bucks for that carpet tear. I asked if we were looking at getting most of the $400 back, and he confirmed we'd definitely get almost all of it. He promised to get the check processed right away. That was the last straightforward conversation we had with him. Weeks went by with no deposit check. I started calling and leaving messages. He'd promised to call back and never did. When he did answer, he'd make excuses about paperwork delays or checks being in the mail. This went on for over a month. Finally, I got him on the phone again, and I could tell something had changed. He said he didn't know what I was so worried about anyway because it was only like $200 I was getting back. I asked him what he meant, reminding him that he'd said we get almost all of it back. He explained that they had to deduct for the nursery we painted and the huge mess we left behind. My blood pressure spiked. We'd left the place spotless. We'd even left him a six-pack of beer in the fridge for being cool about everything. I told him coldly that we'd be going to court then because he'd told us not to repaint, and we'd left that place cleaner than we found it. He asked me to hold on while he checked something. Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. He said he had great news and that our refund check had just shown up in the mail. He told us we could come pick it up. Right? Because checks just magically appear an hour after you threaten legal action. I knew exactly what was happening. These people made their living stealing deposits from broke college kids who couldn't afford to fight back. But they picked the wrong broke college kids this time. I downloaded a recording app before we went to pick up the check. Our state only requires one-party consent for recordings, so I was covered legally. At their office, they handed us a check for $200 with no itemized list of deductions. I asked him to confirm that he'd told us we didn't need to repaint the nursery. He said he remembered saying that. I also asked if he'd said the place looked great at the inspection, and he confirmed it did look good. We took the check and left without cashing it. Instead, I sent an email directly to the CEO of the entire property company, copying the property manager on it. I laid out everything that happened, step by step, with dates and details. The CEO actually responded with this smug email that included a typed list of deductions. He charged us for the paint, for carpet cleaning, for all sorts of things we were told we wouldn't pay for. The funny part was that even with his inflated charges, his own math showed they owed us $230. Nobody could explain why they tried to give us $200. I started digging through state housing regulations, looking for something about wear and tear deductions. What I found instead was way better. There was a statute requiring landlords to return deposits with an itemized list within 30 days, or they lose the right to withhold anything and could face triple damages if they're acting maliciously. We got our refund offer 6 weeks after moving out. No itemized list came until I demanded one. They'd violated the statute completely. I typed up a demand letter citing the exact statute and sent it certified mail. The CEO sent back another snarky email, clearly thinking we'd back down. Instead, we filed in small claims court for the full deposit plus triple damages and court costs. I spent the next month preparing like I was arguing before the Supreme Court. I printed every email where they'd screwed themselves over. I compiled phone records showing dozens of unreturned calls. I printed screenshots from their website showing the CEO was listed as a legal advisor, which meant he definitely should have known these laws. I printed and highlighted every relevant statute. Then I made 3 copies of everything, each in its own binder with sleeve protectors and page numbers. One for us, one for whoever showed up to represent them, and one for the judge. Court day arrived and we brought our recording too. The judge actually laughed when he saw our binders. He asked if we were law students or something. I told him no, just really motivated. The CEO showed up to represent the company, probably thinking he could intimidate us. The judge listened to our recording where the property manager admitted everything, flipped through our documentation, and read the highlighted statutes. He didn't even need to deliberate long. He announced that he was awarding full treble damages, court costs, and interest. I looked over at the CEO and smiled. His face went pale when he realized his little deposit stealing scheme had just cost his company over $1,300 instead of the $350 they should have paid in the first place. We got that check a month later. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.